This is episode 158, How to Stop Avoiding Conflict. Welcome to Alive by Design. My name is Blake Mallon, and we're here to bring you inspiring people, principles, and practices to help you wake up, move toward your meant to, and feel fully alive. Open your mind and let's dive in. Hey guys, before you listen to the podcast, I just want to drop in and say I appreciate you for being here, and I'm super excited about this new Walk With Me series. These are solo episodes where I take some time in the middle of my morning run through the Santa Monica Mountains to share some inspired ideas and thoughts on my mind and heart. If you want to join me for any of these conversations live, you can catch me many mornings on my Facebook page, facebook.com/BlakeMallon.page. Would love to see you there. Love you guys. Enjoy the episode.
Walk with me. So I've always hated conflict. Like, hate it. Avoid it. You know how there's some people that it seems like they just kind of thrive on it? Like, we all have those friends or family members, colleagues that, like, look for an argument, love the fight, almost get energized or fueled up through conflict. Yeah, that's not me, like, at all. I've always been one to try to avoid it at all costs, not engage when one's presented. How about you? Are you someone that loves the battle? Or are you someone that avoids it or has avoided it in the past, like me? And I've been thinking a lot about just my perspective on conflict more recently. And if I were to step back and like remove the emotion and just be that outside observer looking in objectively, just on my own scenarios, whether they be, little quote unquote conflicts or large quote unquote conflicts, in every one of those scenarios, two things are almost always true. One, the process of it is never as bad as I think it'll be. And two, the outcome of it is almost always better. A step forward, progress. If not a total solution, a partial solution. But at the end of the day, a better place than where I was at the beginning. So I've been asking myself, I gotta shift my whole script or belief system on conflict. And it's happening, it's naturally happening, I'm just observing that. So that's why I want to talk about this topic with all of you today, because I know we all have conflict in our lives, sometimes small, sometimes big, but I know it's consistent nonetheless. No matter who you are, where you are, the path you're on right now. So it's gonna be a good conversation, want some collaboration. If you listen to these on the podcast and you do so, get value, leave a review, hit a 5-star rating, drop a review, share the feed. Because I know today's conversation is going to be a good one. So conflict. What was the last conflict you had? Think about it. Stop, pause, right here, right now. What was the last conflict? No matter big, no matter how small. Did you avoid it? Did you run straight into it? Did you spend a huge amount of time thinking about it before you engaged in it? What was the process through it? What was the outcome or resolution from it? These are all good questions to maybe do a quick reflection on some of the more current conflicts, or even maybe some of the larger ones that sometimes stick with us. And we'll deconstruct kind of these scenarios, because I think there's some things that are the same, that are truth, no matter who we are, what we're dealing with. 4 of them specifically I want to talk about to create maybe a shift in how some of us perceive or approach conflict in our day-to-day lives. I'll start off by just reinforcing what I just said, and I'll ask you guys to do a quick little reflection. Is the conflict ever as bad as you think it'll be? Or do we spend more energy, more emotional strain, more concern, worry, stress, fear, anxiety, all the stuff, playing out every possible which scenario that could happen, stumbling into a wormhole of assumptions that are so far from the truth, and whether they are or they're not, we'll never really know. So much wasted energy being life, like our livelihood, before we ever even begin. And if you're like me, throughout my life, I've spent more time in the energy prior to conflict than time dealing with it. And I've dealt with some good ones in my life and my career. I'm sure many of us have. But if I also were to look back and think about the outcome, purely the outcome, the end in mind, the result, the process is never as bad as we make it out to be. 99.9% of the scenarios we make up in our head never happen. They never even really existed to begin with. We get stuck swirling in a direction. Our brains get the best of us, as opposed to just taking steps forward and dealing with only the truths, the facts of the matter we have to deal with. We try to solve every possible scenario. But the process is never as bad as we think it will be. Is that true for you? Be honest. And then here's the big one, because this is what matters. The outcome, the solution, the result, the conclusion, the once you're on the other side. Is it usually better than where you started? And better is relative. Better can mean how you feel. Better can mean a solution or a step forward. Better can mean an adjustment in the course or path we're on, a different way, an alternative route. And I'm willing to bet in most of the scenarios, if we do reflect, small or big, those things are true in the majority of the cases. So why the heck do we avoid conflict if the process of it is always better than we think and the outcome of it is almost always better than when we start? For many of us out there, I know that's not all of us. Check out the view from the top here. Look at the rays coming down. Can you see those sun rays coming down through the clouds today? So 4 thoughts that I think are consistent. At least they're consistent when I reflect on my own experience. I'm also coaching with others through their own conflicts, and I'm willing to bet they're consistent with you in your life. And please chime in and collaborate if they are or they're not, or you have other perspective. I think the first thing that's important is we make a shift in how we approach conflict and the energy we put into it and the expectation we have going through it. I think number 1, right, the first understanding is your perspective matters. Your perspective matters. You listening to this right now, whatever you're doing, you matter. Your perspective matters. You see, there's so much conversation today about self-love, right? We need to love ourselves. We need to fill our own cup. We need to take care of ourselves, self-care. I love the movement that's in that direction. I think it's so important because we've been so deprived. We've been in a culture, especially in America, where it's like so much expectation is pouring on us that it just stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks, and taking care of ourselves seems to land at the bottom of this pile we never get to. So I love the awareness that's coming out in the conversation that's happening, but I don't think it goes deep enough. We talk about self-love, and we don't connect that loving ourselves first begins with respecting ourselves. We've talked about this in some of our past walks. You can go find it if you missed it. But the connection to loving ourselves begins with respecting ourselves. You can't love yourself if you don't respect yourself. And if we talk about respecting ourselves begins with having the courage to share our perspective. Because if we don't have the courage to share our perspective, what we think, what's going through our mind, if we don't have that courage, we're not going to have self-respect. And if we don't have self-respect, we don't have self-love. That's why a lot of the times when we get presented with a situation and we don't move forward, it irks us. It eats us up. It kills us. We waste so much energy and we don't understand why. It's because deep down, even if not at a conscious level, it's at a subconscious level, not sharing your perspective is not respecting yourself, which means you're not loving yourself. The very act of not engaging and moving forward with what you think in your perspective is not having the courage to put yourself first. So I think the first understanding in conflict is that your perspective matters, and even more so, you have to share it and have the courage to share it. Right or wrong doesn't matter, but the courage to share the perspective builds respect, builds love, because your perspective matters. And not sharing it is even worse than any result that could happen once you put that ball in motion. So I think the first kind of understanding or truth is your perspective matters in any situation, no matter how big, no matter how small. I think the second truth, and it took me a long time to learn this one, and guys out there, males out there, men out there, we're slower at this than the women. And this has come as a result of just being, with my wife and in a relationship for a long time. We'll be celebrating our 10-year wedding anniversary this year, 24 years together. Do the math on that one. 24 years together, high school sweethearts. And it took me a long time to learn or come to the conclusion, and this is the second truth or second understanding, that you can't argue feeling. You can't argue feeling. In other words, the way someone feels is their truth. The way someone feels is a truth. A feeling can't be argued. And so often we get into conversations or conflict where we argue feeling. Feeling is always fact. It's a fact. That's how they feel. Now, the underlying circumstances, the underlying issues, right? The underlying information may or may not be true or false, may or may not be real or imagined. But the outcome of that is a feeling, and the feeling is always fact, even if the information below that feeling is not. And it took me forever to realize that, because I'd spend so time in logic land, be like, but that's not true. It's not right. It's not even real. It's not the reality. But it didn't matter, because the facts didn't matter. The only thing that mattered is the feeling, and the way someone feels is always their fact. And that's true for us, right? The way we feel is the way we feel. The way others feel is the way others feel. The way our partner feels is the way they feel. The way our colleagues feel is the way they feel. So you can't argue feeling, and you got to learn to discern feeling, right, from an actual situation or circumstance you're trying to solve. Because sometimes there's no solution to a feeling. So your perspective matters. You can't argue feeling. Feeling is always fact. The third understanding when it comes to conflict is the approach that then we take. So once we have the courage to share our perspective, once we realize that, look, we're not here to argue feeling. Feeling is fact. We're here to get through that, right, to whatever a actual situation or circumstance is that needs to be solved, or we want to solve, or we want, right, to move forward. And the third is just the approach of which we go into that situation. You see, we assume that conflict by the nature of the word is a you versus them, right? A me versus you, a him versus her, a they versus them. We assume it's one party against another party, one idea against another idea. And that in itself is a problem. It's the wrong frame of how we approach any sort of conflict. Instead of looking at any situation like one versus the other, you versus they versus them, him versus her. Take both parties and realize both parties are actually on the same side against the situation. It's the situation, the topic of discussion, the circumstance that is the issue, not the person. And instead of playing ping pong, right, a pickleball is probably a more current analogy, hitting things back and forth, how about we get on the same side of the fence and approach the circumstance or the situation together? It is us versus the situation. And by shifting that little frame, it removes the chances of a personal attack, taking things personally, confusing the situation with the person. I love the quote out there that in any sort of conflict situation, there are three ideas, right? The idea that you bring to the table, the idea that they bring to the table, and then the third idea that evolves from the conflict. You see, it's the third idea that you seek. It's never about your idea or their idea or his idea or her idea. It's about aligning to find a third, better idea or a solution to the situation. You guys, that's the reality. It's not about one idea prevailing. It's about what's the best solution in the given situation. In collaborating on the same side of the fence, you're always going to come up with that third idea. It's that third idea you're seeking. How fast can we get to that third idea together? Not I'm right, you're right, this is why, that's why. No. You got perspective, I got perspective. Let's come together. Here's the solution. What's the third idea that's the better perspective? So I think that understanding is so important, and it starts to realize that it's never about the person, it's about the situation. Don't ever make any situation so important that you're putting the situation over the love and the kindness for one another. Guys, people over problems, right? Relationships over circumstance. Doesn't matter what the situation is. So many times people stumble and they make one certain conflict so important, digging the heels so deep in the ground. Oh, this is a matter of principle. That they make that situation more important than the person. That circumstance more important than relationship. That problem more important than the people. Because at the end of the day, it's the relationships that matter, the relationships that last, the people that matter, that last. Put love and kindness over any situation. It's not about, right, making the point or being right. So come together on the same side of the fence, your idea and their idea, to find the better idea, right? Us together versus the situation. And then the last understanding, right? So we have the courage to give our perspective. Our perspective matters. We realize you can't argue and can't fight feelings. That's not a conflict, that's just feeling. But when we get to a real conflict, something to be solved beyond the layers of emotion, it's not you versus them, it's aligning on the same side. It's us versus the situation. It's your idea and that idea to find a better idea. And then the last understanding, the last truth when it comes to conflict is just realizing that conflict is normal. But combat is a choice, right? Conflict is normal. Conflict is to be expected. Conflict is a part of life. But combat, well, that's a choice. And if you follow each of these understandings into a situation, all right, you have the courage to share a perspective. You discern through feeling. Approach it with some empathy and some compassion. You're mature enough to realize it's not about being right, it's about solving the problem. And you put the people first and you seek alignment. In most situations, you're going to move it forward. In so many examples of conflict, it's not even the actual situation that's the issue. It's how we as people approach it. Isn't it? It's our tone of voice. It's the words we choose. It's the energy or emotion we put behind it. Like, that's what creates a trigger. Where if we follow these perspectives, it's going to create a different approach. But I will give a giant caveat, because I've dealt with this in my life, and I'm sure you're thinking about it as well. sometimes we'll do all of this, and sometimes you'll find somebody that isn't ready and willing to reciprocate on the other end. And I guess my guidance there is we do our best to follow what we're talking about, put them first, align, find common ground, seek the solution, move the emotion, the feeling aside. But if you find someone that's just combative no matter what, and that's how they choose to approach the situation, like a kid, not an adult, amateur, not mature, just understand that, combat's a choice. And in those situations, I think you do your best. But if it's not being reciprocated, you also can choose to disengage until that person comes around and maybe learns the lesson and realizes that the greater good or a solution is worth a better approach. But don't get down in the mud and start to fight. The only thing that you'll find when dealing in the mud is you're just going to get muddy. So don't get brought down to that level. It's not going to be a solution. So last understanding is just realizing that conflict is normal. And we shouldn't avoid it. We shouldn't expect not to run into it. We shouldn't be surprised when we do. We're all going to run into it every single day in all different levels. So we might as well learn to make this our friend and shift our perspective on the outcome that we can have going through it. But combat is a choice. And if we do take the right steps and we still find somebody that's not ready and willing to meet us halfway, just realize that it's our choice to disengage. So hopefully those truths are true for you. You guys tell me. Is that helpful? Is that beneficial? Can you apply that lens to some conflicts in your life? Maybe if you look back and reflect and you realize, hey, yeah, that is true in those situations. Maybe you have other perspective that you found. If so, please leave it in the reviews if you found this helpful. Maybe you have somebody that's in a conflict right now, and you want to share this with them. If that's not the case right now and you're not in the middle of it and your circle's not in the middle of it, hey, that's an amazing day. But just know there's probably some right around the corner, so I know this conversation will be useful. And here's to shifting our perspective on conflict in our lives and using it as a way for us to come together, grow together, and seek better together through alignment, right? And how we approach our day-to-day situations, not running from them, but running through them and collaborating in a way that creates a better scenario for not only us, but those around us. So until the next time we walk together, thanks for our time. And here's to learning and going and growing through all the conflicts in our life every single day. Till the next time, take care, everybody.
Hey guys, one last thing. I'm super excited that this new podcast, Alive by Design, just went live. You see, I designed the show to bring you inspired thoughts and fascinating conversations with the world's most impactful people, to provide transformative principles and practices to help you wake up, move toward your meant to, and feel fully alive. And I'd love for you to help me spread the word now. Simply subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on this platform right now. So if I've ever given you value, please do me this personal favor and go subscribe now. And if you found today's episode helpful in any way, make sure you share this with at least one friend today. You have the power right now to change someone's day. So send them a text message with a link to alivebydesign.com, or simply copy and paste the link right from this podcast platform. Who's one person you know right now that you want to see succeed, that you want to see grow, that you want to see feel more alive? Shoot them a text with your largest takeaway from today and be a light in their day. And if you were referred here by a friend, make sure you shoot them a text back and say thank you. I'd love to hear from you directly on what you got from today's podcast. So if you're up for it, drop by my Instagram @BlakeMallon and shoot me a DM. And as always, thank you for showing up. I'm grateful for you, and I hope our time together today in some small way helped you feel a little more alive. Until next time.